The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University.
Good day. Welcome to International Insights. I am G. Doug Davis, and with me is Michael Slobodchikoff. On this episode, we'll be speaking with Tobias Belgrano. Tobias has a political science degree from the Catholic University of Argentina and a master's degree in government affairs from Buenos Aires University. He's passionate about Latin American democracies and regional political instability. He specializes in the social integration of slums in Buenos Aires, urban areas, and has experience working for NGOs as well as the public sector. Currently, he is working as an independent political consultant for investment in developing nations. Welcome to the show from Argentina.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me.
Perfect. Tobias, I want to begin the questioning today and talk about not domestic issues first, but more international issues and how they've affected Argentina and Latin America in general. And specifically, I want to ask you about how the Ukraine war has affected both Argentina and Latin America. And also, how is Argentina's place in the world system different due to this conflict?
Well, particularly Argentina has suffered the two hits in its prices and in its inflation levels. Argentina was having a inflation level of almost 50% until 2020 when the pandemic shocked, and when the pandemic shocked, prices skyrocket a lot, especially food prices, making it for the poor people in Argentina getting the worst of this crisis. And secondly, the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war made a change in the global economy, especially in gas prices. So it forced Argentina to shift its exports to energy once again for a long period of time. Argentina is now interested in moving through exports. For example, recently, Minister Sergio Massa, with the presence of the Vice President, Mrs. Cristina Kirchner, inaugurated a gas pipeline intending to expand the exports of the country for the near future and to be able also to pay the IMF debt. Globally and geopolitically, the region has been hit with the challenge of moving between two moving between two poles of power. In this case, the United States, and on the other case, China and its allies. In this case, Russia. Argentina and many Latin American countries are shifting and tiptoeing between the two postures because they cannot like fully support one or the other, the NATO or Russia. The problem is, for example, Argentina has big soy exports that use Russian fertilizers that represents almost 40-50% of the fertilizers the country needs to produce soybeans that are the main export of the country. Even though Argentina is trying to move forward towards a more energy based export production, it still has strong soybean exports and agricultural exports. So Russia provides Argentina and Brazil also, the big power in the region, with fertilizers that these countries need. So they cannot uh, the NATO because they lose their fertilizer supplier, but also in the case especially of Argentina with the debt in the IMF, they cannot fully support Russia like Venezuela has, like Bolivia has, like Cuba has, or like, I mean, Brazil didn't didn't fully support, but they have a symbolical meetings with Lavrov in Brasilia, and the visit to Lula to China was also really controversial. So Argentina is in in thin ice. We cannot move towards any of those poles, but this has been interestingly taken into advantage by the current administration. You know, I think there is no president in the world that has met in 1 year with Vladimir Putin in Moscow, with Xi Jinping in China, and with Joe Biden in the same year. Only Alberto Fernandez was able to do that, and that is because, in my opinion, the government's diplomacy, in spite of being tiptoeing between various positions, that has to do with the status affairs of the country. I mean, we cannot support anyone completely, so we take a posture of being friendly with everyone, because we cannot support completely anyone. So it's really interesting to see how Alberto Fernandez, being a Peronist government that has little resistance tends to have a little resistance in Washington, met with Xi Jinping. He also, when he met with Vladimir Putin, said to him that he wanted Argentina to become the entrance for Russia to Latin America. With those words, despite those words, Alberto Fernandez was received by Joe Biden in the White House. So it is interesting, the posture of Argentina, that they don't fully support anyone, but we support everyone at the same time. So it's interesting in diplomatic terms.
Excellent, Tobias. Argentina is becoming much more important in international affairs, and it's considered a possibility to become a member of the BRICS. What would it mean for Argentina to join India, Russia, China, and South Africa and become actually a member of this organization?
So Argentina has a divided opinion. Speaking of the polarization and the different support between international powers, Argentina has a 50-50 position, for example, with the US. According to a 2015 opinion poll, 43% of Argentinians support the US against almost 43% of Argentinians who reject the US. So, joining the BRICS, we don't see that difference and that polarization between Western powers and other foreign powers in countries, at least like the Ukraine, for example. I mean, with that level of polarization of opinions again with the West, Argentina, despite being in the Western hemisphere, has this duality. Argentina, by joining the BRICS, will get the possibility of getting more finance, especially in the critical moment of the Argentinian economy, with 100% inflation and a really low level of US dollars in the reserves. Argentina is searching for any way or any supplier that can allow the country to get for more harder currency. The Argentina has been using the swap with China, with the debt within the international fund. The BRICS is another source of hard currency for the country.
Good. I want to shift topics for 1 second and move to football, not American football, but world football, and talk about last year's World Cup, where we all were mesmerized by Argentina's win in the World Cup, and the fact that Argentina has one of the world's top players in what we call soccer. How important is this to Argentina, and what place does soccer have in Argentina's culture and identity?
Well, first of all, soccer was inheritance from especially from the British relations that Argentina had with England at the beginning of the 20th century. Uh, for example, just to give you an example, the southern train stations are called like football clubs. For example, or football clubs are named after the train station. For example, Banfield is a soccer team that has its own train station and its own county. So it is interesting, like to do this correlationship with, especially in the southern hemisphere, that was the of Buenos Aires, that is the workers' neighborhoods. Um, Argentina has also used soccer, and that's something that is really interesting in its relationships, in its civilian relationships with with other underdeveloped nations, as a way to express frustration against other countries. For example, we all know, and it's memorable, we know the hand of God of Maradona, or La Mano de Dios, that he did to the British after Argentina lost the war against England for the Malvinas. So countries countries have seen how we express that frustration and how we are able to uh, take some back, at least something back. Countries that have a colonial history, like Bangladesh, has become a real fan of Argentinian football. Also, India. I mean, other countries see and reflect how passionate we are about football, or soccer, as you call it in the US. So yeah, that has a lot to do with our culture, and also it's also a way to give us our pride back. That was the reason why everyone saw the massive parties in the streets, and people being happy and celebrating in the streets, because the crisis, and the global crisis that are suffering the developing nations, and particularly Argentina, has made us feel. I mean, Argentina have seen their sons leaving to the US, to Europe. I mean, there's been a big migration. I'm not from Argentina, from underdeveloped nations to developed nations, that has hurt our pride. So winning the World Cup was a way to bring our pride back. The the One of the Argentinian players said that in a moment he was happy. He declared when he won the World Cup that he was happy because he was bringing the cup to the country that was going through a painful moment. Because we are all seeing many of our family members leave the country.
Excellent, Tobias. Argentina has another distinction in that the head of the Catholic Church is Pope Francis, who comes from Buenos Aires. What does it mean to have an Argentinian basically hold the lead office of the Catholic Church?
So diplomatically has had a lot of advantages. For example, the Pope celebrated a meeting with a lot of world leaders, in which he invited Kristalina Georgieva and the former Minister of Economy Martin Guzman, that met during those meetings, and were able to discuss a lot of things regarding to Argentina's debt in those meetings. So diplomatically, it has had a lot of effects, and has been a help for the country in hard moments. But also symbolically, it means it's the symbolically, it also means the integration of the country to the West. Despite there is this difference between the 43% we talked before, Argentina is still part out of the West, and still, I mean, the Pope speaks Italian from his own family, so that despite sometimes we shift from east to west according to our geopolitical interests of the moment, symbolically it has a lot of meaning of the Western roots of Argentina, because Argentina, despite a lot of things, has a lot of European migration. Despite we have our native, local, original people, uh, Argentina has a strong component of Italian migration. So also symbolically means our integration with the West and our like spokesman in the West, if we can say so.
Tobias, I want to move a little bit, and you've mentioned several times now the careful balancing act that Argentina plays between the US, China, and Washington. And I'd like to ask you to basically tell me, what is the view of the United States in Buenos Aires? Is it viewed as a big brother in the Western Hemisphere? Is it viewed as an equal? How is the United States viewed?
So, as I told you before, the opinion polls represented that 43% of Argentinians have a reject the US against another 43 that have a positive view of the US. So it's really polarized. It's a really polarized uh, battlegrounds. But the thing is, for the 43% that rejects the US is seen as the IMF and like a colonial country that force us to adapt our policies, our economic policies, especially to the US, to the US recipe for the economy. Especially, this resembles a lot in the generation that lived in the 1990s during the Menem administration and in the Washington Consensus was applied in Argentina, and how it ended in the 2001 crisis with social unrest, with struggles in the streets, and with like a massive economical disaster. However, this represents especially the Peronist half of the electorate, especially. On the other side, you have the Juntos por el Cambio. However, despite this, I believe that the U.S. is perceived as part of the West and one of the leaders of the West. But the thing is, Argentina still resembles a lot itself to Europe. I mean, Argentina has the aim to become Europe. That's kind of the difference between maybe Brazil or other Latin American nations that their aim is to become the US or to do things more like the US. Argentina, especially because of the European migration and the way society thinks. I mean, the books we read, the authors that are in our Buenos Aires libraries tend to resemble more to Europe than to the US, and that is a reality. It's not like something that we can like give an opinion of. But the thing is, Argentina tends to look more to Europe. Also, also the the Peronist half that I talked before. It's really resentful about the U.S. and it really mistrusts the U.S. But also, there's another thing that our commercial partners are the dispute the U.S., Brazil, and China. So our tiptoeing between the two powers had not also to do with with how we think of the U.S. It also has to do with the influence China has in our economy. I mean, our exports is soybean, and we mainly sell them to China. Argentina and the U.S., despite what people think, are two competitive economies. I mean, the U.S. it's an economy that sells, besides heavy machinery, also sells agricultural products and food. So we tend to we have a we compete with the US in the products we export. So we are not complementary economies. Argentina and Brazil are complementary economies. The US and Brazil are complementary economies. But that has been a geopolitical and historic problem, because at the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina and the US were the two powers in America as a continent. So a lot of people that, my grandparents, my great grandparents, that see the US also as a competitor, not that much as an ally, especially the nationalist people that lived in those times.
Yeah. Tobias, I would like to turn to the domestic side of Argentina. And you have background in international development and international investment. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Argentinian economy, and what is the origin of the crisis, the multiple economic crisis that have occurred really over the past 20 years?
So, the Argentinian economy has a big opportunity in the future. We are seeing how the world, Argentina is shifting the export to prioritize energy in a context where the world is looking for more energy providers to replace Russia. Argentina has the second biggest gas reserves in the world, and the second oil reserves in the world, but it's shale gas. So they have to do big investments to take the gas away and to export the oil. In a matter of months, Argentina invested a lot of money to do the gas pipeline to be able to export our gas to the world. And they are thinking of changing adding a pipeline to Brazil so they can provide to the Brazilian economy. So it is interesting how Argentina is trying to shift its exports to energy in a process where the world is demanding energy. And also the second export that we haven't talked about yet is lithium. Lithium, Argentina shares with Bolivia and Chile the biggest lithium reserves in the world, and it's increasing demand. It's showing also the competition between powers in that region. China is intending to invest in lithium in Argentina, and they have been the front runners in this race. And the US is starting to take this into account, and we have the visit from the Southern Hemisphere Commander in Chief from the Biden administration that visited Buenos Aires and talked a lot about the dangers of Chinese investments. And secondly, as you asked, the crisis that has originated in these 20 years has to do with the shifting prices in our exports. We've seen Cristina Kirchner and Nestor Kirchner, both presidents that got into power with in Argentina with its currency really devaluated, and they suddenly find themselves with the soybean rising to 600 US dollar per ton. That was like three times the prices they had before, and they received massive funds to do public policy and social policy. That was the boom of the Latin America at the beginning of the 21st century. This boom went down and crashed from the 2014 2011 forward, because prices stagnated and fall. Especially the example of it's not only Argentina, of that is Venezuela, of how the oil prices rose and skyrocket, and then they fall to the ground, and the country saw a social disaster and the massive migration we all know. But Argentina suffered a similar process with high prices in their exports, especially soybean, and the falling. So this public expenditure, it's been difficult to lower. That's the biggest problem, and the problem is that no one wants to reduce public spending because of the social consequences that has. Patricia Bullrich, that is one of the front runners of Juntos por el Cambio, that's running for the primaries against the local Buenos Aires governor Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, has said quite directly that she's going to reduce public spending and use the police to do all the repression they need to sustain this policy. So in Latin American countries where the presence of the state is so important and public expenditure is so important to poor areas of the country, lowering and reducing public expenditure usually tends to mean unrest in the streets and protests, and tends to end in massive chaos. Patricia Bullrich directly says, "I'm going to repress this chaos with the army and with the police if it's necessary." So that's the scenario we are seeing in the near future. I mean, for one side, we have an economy that it's integrated into the international supply chain, but from the other side, internally, we're seeing an impoverished society that it's going to protest and fight back if they see their little capital being evaporated. I mean their social security plans, they see them reduced, they're going to protest, and there's going to be probably violence in the streets if this happens really violently.
Tobias, we only have 2 minutes left, unfortunately. So I would like to ask you very briefly, most Americans know Argentina for two things. One is soccer, and the other is the Perones and Evita on stage. If there was one thing that you could do to introduce Americans to Argentina, what would it be?
So also I would add meat to that equation, like the grills. So I mean, if I ever received you and I want to introduce you to Argentina, I would take you to a grill here in Buenos Aires. So it's a good introduction to the country. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it has to do with what we were talking previously. I mean, an industry that exports excellency, like soccer in this case, or football, with players like Messi, with players like Maradona, with players in the best teams in the world. But on the other side, we also have polarization, political discussion, passion, and the story, because that's important in Argentinian politics. Politicians tend to, for example, Cristina Kirchner, tend to take real consideration into their narratives they give to society, they provide to society.
Tobias, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. And I hope we have a chance to bring you back. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Tobias. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you both for the space, and let's hope we can talk back in the future.
Sounds good.
I look forward to it. Take care.
Okay, take care.